PI Perspectives.
Crosstracks case management system. That is what we are talking about today. Are you using a case management system? What are you waiting for? If you don't use a case management system, you really need to look into implementing that into your business regimen. I've been at it with Crosstracks now a little over a year, and it's just been a game changer for my business. They are SOC 2 certified, SOC 2 Type 2 certified. If you don't know what that means, it means that their encryption system is second to none. And you have to go through a whole screening process to figure out if you can even qualify for that, and they have. So you know with certainty your data is being protected. I don't think there's another case management system out there that offers that same ability to have the SOC 2 Type 2 certification. As you guys know, I've been singing the praises of Crosstracks, and I really believe in this product, and I believe you should check it out. Contact Brad, contact Pat, one of the team members over there, and see if it's right for you. Crosstracks case management system, check it out today. I wanted to talk to you about the Investigator's Toolbox. We have a big announcement. We have created an app for the website. You can now download that app on your phone. If you use Apple, if you use Samsung, it's on both platforms. You can gain access to the site. And the really cool part about it is once you log in, it's on your phone and you're good to go. You can just open up the app and the site is completely usable. Everything you find on the site, on the website, you can actually use on your phone as well. So I'm really happy to bring that to market. It should be about mid-April that it's being released. I want to give you guys the heads up. I want to thank everybody that has listened to the show and gone on and signed up. We got several hundred investigators in there. Really excited by this site and the contributions by everybody involved in the site. We've got some great content. With the app, you'll get push notifications when we add content, which is something that's really cool. And we have some other really cool features coming down the pipe that I'm really excited to talk to you about. So it's www.investigators-toolbox.com.
Welcome to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. Today's an extra special show. We have Vincent D'Agostino from Bluevoyant stopping by to talk about his role in the famous Silk Road cybercrime investigations. Vinny's an attorney, former FBI agent, and an expert on cybercrime. We're honored to have him on the show, so please welcome Vincent D'Agostino and your host, Private Investigator Matt Spaier.
And welcome everybody to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spaier, your host. Today, I'm very honored to introduce Vinny D'Agostino. Vinny, how are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Matt.
Yeah, no problem, man. So we hooked up through Ken Fetter. So shout out to Kenny for the connection here. Kenny's an old friend of mine, and you guys happen to know each other. And he said, you need to talk to Vinny. And wow, I really did need to talk to Vinny. You've had quite a career, man. You've covered some different areas, an attorney, you've done cyber investigations, and you worked for the FBI. Yep. And you were part of the team that was involved in the Silk Road investigations.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about how you started off with law school and kind of went the whole route and got into doing that investigative work.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird how sometimes things come together in life that you can't anticipate, like different things you're interested in. As you go through life, you think there's no way that there's a job or jobs that could ever combine those. And my story is weird because I all of those things kind of came together. So I started out very interested in technology at a really young age. My dad was a lifer at IBM. So when he immigrated here, he went to the Army. And then after the Army, he started working fixing typewriters at IBM. This was before they were even doing PCs and stuff.
Wow. So
we had these, 200-pound typewriters in the house, those big metal ones. And I remember him bringing home that type ball. You remember that ball that they patented that was like, the equivalent of like a rocket ship back then. And He was telling me how it worked and how much money the company was making off of it. And then eventually, as they moved into PCs, he started bringing home these computers and these parts. And my brother and I just fell in love with it.
Sure.
And he would, and they were simple back then. I mean, they were huge. Absolutely. So, it wasn't like it is even now.
Yeah.
And so he would, quickly start showing us how to build these machines, taking the case apart and putting the motherboard in and then putting the cards in and, how to set up the power supply and the memory and all that. And so I started down that path and figured that's where I was going to head. I had a passion for it. It's the kind of thing where I would stay up all night playing around with these computers, getting in trouble for playing these with computers all night. And so when I went to college, I started out with a focus on computer science, thinking that's the route I would go. I started thinking about the FBI probably late high school.
Okay.
And it crossed my mind that, maybe there's a way to do the computer thing to help me get into the FBI. But that was really kind of a pie in the sky type of dream. And then the FBI the Penn State did some kind of job career thing, and they had, representatives from the FBI there talking to students. And I had asked the agent, who was probably 4 minutes to retirement at that point.
Wow.
And I said, I'm interested. I've been thinking about it. I went online. This was, what they had on the website back then was super primitive. And I said, I went on the website and I saw, the qualifications and what do you need? And he goes, well, what is your major? And I said, oh, it's computer science. He's like, I don't know about this computer stuff. It's really going anywhere.
It's a fad, right?
Literally, that was what he implied. He was like, this computer stuff, it's that's not really going to help. What else are you interested in? And I said, well, I took like a business law class and I loved it. And I took a constitutional law class and I loved it. And he said, well, go to law school. Have you thought about law school? I said, I've thought about it, but this was early on. And I was still trying to figure out like what, there's a point in your life where you're kind of not sure what you're capable of. And, you think you want to make sure that your aspirations kind of are consistent with your skills and your potential. Right. And I don't think I had a ton of confidence at that point. So I thought about it and I was like, law school, I mean, my parents would love it. But is it something that I can really do? So I switched over to pre-law and I loved all the classes. And I decided that even if the FBI didn't work out, I could really be happy practicing law. Like worst case scenario, I'm doing something that I actually still love. And I love the idea of the FBI, but you don't know what the FBI is really going to be like.
Sure. Yeah.
So I did that, went through, graduated with, I think I was political science pre-law, or pre-law was the same as political science, whatever it was. Then went to law school. And then at that point was getting real serious about, what the plan would be once I got through law school for the FBI. And so I talked to some people there and they told me that, in order to be competitive, if you want to get into the FBI, there's a minimum qualifications. And I hear this a lot from people. Well, I went to college, I graduated with a 4-year degree. I can be an FBI agent. Technically, you meet the minimum qualifications, but the problem is the number of applications they get. It's something insane. Like for every seat, there's like 10,000 applications for every seat in Quantico.
Yeah, I believe it.
You can't just be like, hey, I checked the minimum boxes. I went to a 4-year college. I got a degree in fashion, and now I'm working at, Ace Hardware. I'd be a great FBI agent. They're going to be like, well, you technically check the boxes, but you have nothing that we would want. So, and that's not to say, by the way, you can come in almost under any discipline. Traditionally, it was
accountants,
a
right?
third.
Right.
What's that?
Accountants.
Yeah.
Lawyers, right.
A third CPAs,
Yeah.
a third lawyers, and a third military. It was general breakdown. I mean, there was a little bit on the margins, but that's what the guy told me, the recruiter. He said, lawyers are always going to be needed, and he was right. But the problem is that by the time I started getting serious about applying and I was in law school and thinking about the next step, I was talking to people who were applying and not getting in as lawyers. And it's because lawyers were really a dime a dozen. I mean, there's so many lawyers.
In New York, especially.
Yeah, exactly. In New York, I mean, forget it. And so I started to get a little nervous about that. And when I started speaking to I guess it was probably towards my last year of law school, I started speaking to someone at the FBI about applying. And she said, well, tell me more about your background. And as I went through all my technical background, because I was still working summers and Christmases at IBM, and I was working at Penn State in the computer lab. I was setting up small networks and repairing computers, working in the lab. I was doing that as a hobby. And then as I was in law school, I was maintaining small networks for law firms in the area. Again, just kind of as a hobby. I was doing it on nights and weekends because I just loved it.
Sure.
So when they added all of that up, she said, well, you can come in under 2 disciplines, law and cyber. And cyber was the big thing at that point. This was 2003, post 9/11. Right. They realized part of the analysis of the hot wash after 9/11 was that, the FBI was completely, not prepared from a technological perspective. I mean, they were
behind the eight
using,
ball with
yeah,
technology,
I mean,
absolutely.
their
Yep.
technology was garbage.
Yep.
And so they were using computers, floppy disks. And I mean, maybe some of them had CD-ROMs at the time, but
Nice.
they were really underfunded in that area and underdeveloped. So that moved me my application once I passed the bar. So I graduate law school, I take the bar that summer, I pass. Then it's like, all right, this is as good as you're going to get as far as, putting everything together timing wise, because the process still takes a while.
Yeah.
So my application luckily was well received, and I went towards the top of the pile, and I was able to get into a class within, a few years, which is quick. I was,
I was going to
really
say,
lucky.
you actually were doing defense work as an attorney.
Yeah.
For a couple of years. It was like 3 or 4 years, I think.
Yeah. Right? I was at my law firm. I started working at my law firm in 99 because it was right down the street from my law school. I went to Hofstra. And so it was right down the street. And so, yeah, I was there for like 5 years. I think I officially practiced for 2. I got a phenomenal experience during law school because they really, they were bringing me into so many different things so early on that by the time I graduated, there was not really a stress or a fear because I'd been doing it, unofficially for how many years, working with the attorneys and stuff. But yeah, I was doing mostly civil defense work. So a lot of insurance defense litigation. We did medical malpractice defense and things like that. I did very minor criminal defense stuff. My heart was always kind of on the prosecutor side of things. My wife was a prosecutor, at the time, and up until recently. So I never really felt like I would wanted to go to the criminal defense work. I think I would just be really picky about the matters I took. I'd have to actually believe in the case to do that.
Yeah, it's tough, man. I made the decision when I started my business, like, probably about a year in. I'm like, defense is not for me.
Yeah.
I had worked for a plaintiff firm in-house, and I had a similar situation. I didn't actually go to law school, but they were prepping me like I was going to law school. So they were teaching me how to do all this stuff. And they literally told me, like, go to law school. We're going to pay you like you're an employee working for us. And then when you come out, you just come work for us. I was like, that is a sweetheart deal. And I really, really considered it until I was sitting in Bronx Supreme Court one day. And I had this freak out moment. Like, I see all these attorneys behind me. I'm like, there are too many attorneys here in New York. I'm never going to stand out. I'm just going to be another schlub, and I want to do that. The other thing that you said I thought was really interesting, you're talking about your experience, excuse me, in defense.
Yep.
And that really laid the groundwork, in my opinion, for what you're doing today in your experience of dealing with insurance carriers and knowing how they think and knowing budget wise and panels and all this. And we're going to get into all that later. But I think that laid the groundwork for your experience. And you had such a sidetrack to take to do the FBI stuff, but not even realizing the experiences that you had working for that law firm were going to benefit you later on when you got back into the private sector.
And that's happened to me with like 4 different things that I'm still shocked about. It goes to my continuing developing theory about all of this being a simulation, right? Like how, the odds of those things coming back into play, right? It's like, all of that coming in, the cyber part of it, how it lent itself to the latter part of my FBI career. No way. And people were like, man, you really planned that out. I was like, I didn't plan it out. I just was doing things I loved. And then looking for ways to bridge the gap between the 2 separate things, but certainly didn't think that would happen to the extent that it has been happening.
Right. So did you take the blue pill or the red pill?
Yeah, I think I went down the rabbit hole. I think I took the red pill. I just, you know what it is? I don't, as you spin your wheels on you thinking about these things and you say, well, I don't want to think about them too much because then I might actually inadvertently sabotage.
Mr. Anderson's going to come get you.
Yeah. Like, what was that movie? Vanilla Sky, right? When Tom Cruise becomes too aware that he's living in this kind of dream or whatever, then all of a sudden it becomes a nightmare. And I kind of believe that, like, and I think that's for everybody. When you experience success, there's always a certain amount of almost like self-doubt or you kind of question, right? Just like when bad things happen, you question why me. When good things happen, sometimes you question why me? How is it that this is happening? But I think there's a lot of things you can do along the way to increase your odds to make those things, those quote unquote lucky things happen. Right. And I think the thing that's missing now in this world for a lot of people is people have this desire for success. And because of social media and things like that, everyone seems like an overnight success.
Yeah.
But they're not. Right. But especially what's portrayed on social media for a lot of people is the idea that people are overnight successes. And there's not enough people talking about the road and how long the road was. Right. And not enough people talking about how many people did things very similarly and ended up not coming out on top. So it's that I think it's Jefferson, that quote, right, is luck is the intersection of preparation and hard work. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that's when people say you're lucky. Yes. I think anyone who has any success is lucky, because there are people who did things very similarly that didn't have that outcome. But if you weren't prepared for those opportunities when they come along, right, if you weren't preparing for that and you're not interested in hard work, then those opportunities will just be another part of a long list of failures on your part to say, oh, something came along, but I didn't take it because I wasn't ready, or I took it and I screwed it up royally. Well, that was the 5 years before that you should have been preparing for that moment. Right. So that when it came along, you could actually succeed.
It's interesting that you're talking about all this stuff, and we're going to go down a different road in a minute as we segue into what we're talking about here after the break. But it's we get this a lot, folks that work for the federal government that then transition and go into private practice. So there are things you can do while you're working for the government that can set the groundwork for your post-government career, right? Yep. So things along the way, it's not just the the skills that you gain in whatever specialty you have. There's a lot more nuance to it, and really understanding how to run a business also is something that now you're responsible for everything. We're gonna step out real quick and take a break, but when we come back, we'll touch on that a little bit, and then I really want to go down the road and talk about the Silk Road investigation. We'll touch on that a little bit, and we'll talk about basically what you're doing these days too. So everybody sit tight, and we will be right back.
Are you overwhelmed with your current caseload? Could you use some help with your skip trace assignments? With Merlin Locate Services, rather than adding staff, you can add an entire skip trace department of licensed private investigators who specialize in skip tracing. Check out merlinlocate.com today. When you work with Merlin Locate Services, you bring on a valuable experience and trusted extension to your team. Want full data access without a site inspection? IRB Search gives you full Social Security numbers, dates of birth, up-to-date contact info, and so much more, without the inconvenience or cost of an inspection. As an added bonus, you can access IRB data on any device in any location. You'll always have the best data, anytime, anywhere. Visit irbsearch.com and use exclusive promo code PIPOD2021 for a free trial and 100 credits. Offer available for new and returning customers. Check out the PI Institute of Education at piinstitute.com. Since 1989, Kelly Riddle has been teaching on subjects such as surveillance, nursing home investigations, insurance fraud, domestic investigations, hidden assets, and accident scene investigations. The PI Institute of Education is a featured learning partner in the investigatorstoolbox.com. So check out the free content on the site, then visit the Institute for more great savings on additional classes. GAPI will conduct a 3-day training seminar offering 16 hours of continuing education credit on April 21st to the 23rd. This virtual conference will feature some great speakers including Eddie Ajabe, Jim Nanos, Kelly Riddle, Jim Baker, Mike Rundles, and our very own Matt Spaier. You can register online at gapi.org or see the show notes. Congrats to show guest Chris Salgado, Chris Don's latest cover of PI Magazine and Highlight Cyberpol. The issues available today.
And welcome back to PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spaier, your host. Today, I'm honored to have Vincent D'Agostino with us today. You work with Bluevoyant. That's your business these days. But prior to that, you were working for the FBI, and you got involved in a very, very major investigation back in 2011, I believe, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, Vinny, welcome back to the program. And let's dive right in, man. So, Silk Road, for those that aren't familiar with that investigation, can you briefly just give me an overview of what was going on there and what was your involvement in that investigation?
Sure. Yeah. Around 2011, somebody opened up what's called a Tor hidden service, which is just a website on the dark web.
The Onion router.
Yeah, it was exactly exists within the Onion router. And the website, which was called Silk Road, was brokering in narcotics. At the time, it was weapons as well. No child porn or anything like that. Right. But the site was growing very, very, very quickly. And because of where it was being hosted within Tor, it's not like a traditional website, which is very easy to identify who owns the site or who's accessing the site. There's no legal process that can be served for someone operating a website on Tor. Yeah. So that site was growing.
Where are they located, right?
Yeah,
jurisdiction.
Exactly. So that was the background to the beginning of the investigation, which actually started before I even landed on cyber. I was still over at organized crime at the time. Mm-hmm. So the investigation started probably around 2011, and I think I went over to the cyber squad in 2012 when the case was really kind of like getting full swing at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and very interesting. I got to tell you, I take offense though to the whole Princess Bride thing and the Dredge Fire Roberts. Like, I love that movie.
And it was intentional. There's conversations between the name was picked intentionally to create the confusion around who's actually running it.
Yeah,
that was deliberate. That wasn't just happenstance.
Of course, nobody knew who the Dread Pirate was. I mean, it could be 10 people. You don't know.
It could be 10 people.
The whole concept of the real Dread Pirate retiring, 3 years earlier and then handing it off to another guy and then off to another guy. It's kind of genius, actually.
It is. Yeah. The problem is that all these conversations about that conspiracy were recovered from the laptop. So, it's great if you can play that angle. But when you have the conversation that precedes it that says, hey, if you ever get in trouble, you could always be like, hey, it wasn't me, it was someone else. And that's kind of then blows up your alibi.
Okay. So you getting involved in this, I mean, it's in full swing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How soon was it before you guys kind of pulled the plug on the thing and just went, all in to take this thing down?
Yeah, the arrest happened in 2013. So every agency, there were multiple agencies that had an investigation on it. Local police departments, of course, every federal agency, DEA, Secret Service. Mm-hmm. Everyone was looking to figure out how to solve this. And the problem is that using traditional investigative techniques don't work. If you can sign up to the site and buy drugs, but when you get it in the mail, fingerprinting the envelopes doesn't do anything.
Sure.
The guy doesn't have, even if you track it back through the mail of where it was sent from, it's not like it's going to be sent from someone's house. It's going to be sent from some random mailbox in some town. So now what?
Right.
And then even so, let's say you track it back to someone who sent it. So you go talk to that person agrees to cooperate. What do they really know?
Yeah.
They don't know who DPR is. They don't know who any of the people are in real life. They can give you screen names and conversations, but if the people are not saying who they are, then it's useless.
Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of different federal agencies that were involved in this too, right? I mean, definitely not just the FBI. I think that it started with the DA, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's a drug case, and the FBI actually had to fight. The cyber squads had to fight to even open up the case because it's a drug case. But this goes to show you, right? And this is why I made the switch from organized crime over to cyber at that point, was because everything was going to have a cyber nexus. Mm-hmm. I could see it a mile away. Like even the wise guys we were arresting, we were seizing laptops, we were seizing phones. They were running gambling operations using online services, websites. So if wise guys were getting into that area, then I knew that it was very likely that every criminal violation the FBI worked was going to have a cyber nexus, white collar, drugs. They were all going to have that component to it. And this was no different. But the FBI back then was saying, this is a drug case. Why would cyber open up a drug case?
It's so funny. Like if you look at the McMillions too, it's the same thing. Like they didn't want the case to start off with like, like I don't even want to see this thing. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I guess I'll start doing it. Next thing you know, it's like boom, there's this huge mega case.
Yeah.
It's so funny, man. I actually recall Fear City, the great documentary on Netflix, talking about technology and kind of the technology they were using at the time to get information on the mob. Super fascinating, right?
Oh yeah.
Turning CNN off, so the guy calls the cable company and says, "Hey, my TV's not working." Gives
Yeah.
them a chance to get somebody in there to
Cable
play
box. Yeah, the surreptitious entry team. Yeah, it's so funny because I just recently I just recently started watching The Sopranos straight through,
Yeah.
and I've seen episodes here and there through the years, and I know how it ends, so don't worry, no spoiler, no risk of spoiler. I obviously saw
Something
the
about
last,
Journey. I don't know.
yeah, but I never really watched it. It of course came up a ton during our investigations from our sources and stuff would constantly reference it. We'd be on wires and they're like, "Hey, did you see last night?" And sometimes there were issues where I'm like, I don't know what is mirroring what. Are the wise guys mirroring the show? Is the show mirroring the wise guys? But yeah, the technology at one point, when Sal Bumpancero, Big Pussy, is wiring up, I was laughing because he's got this like Walkman size recorder, and I said, I was talking to someone, and I said, when I got there, luckily we had some bulky recorders, not nearly that size, but we had some bulky ones. But we quickly started, as the technology evolved, especially regarding Bluetooth and things like that, and just the recorders generally. I didn't have to slap on these giant size recorders on our sources. It was a much easier sell than saying, "Here's some brick that put it in your pocket." So the technology changed a lot, and allowed a lot of recordings to exist that never would have before.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I was in the mid '90s or early '90s actually. I worked for Department of Investigation, my internship through college, and I was in the investigative squad, and I was in charge of doing like setting up wiretap equipment and video equipment.
Oh, nice.
And it was bulky. It was definitely bulky, but it was cool. Like I remember the first day the guy got in there and he turned on the TV and we could see us, on the TV.
Yeah.
Go find the camera. It's somewhere in this
room.
Yeah,
somewhere in this room, right? Yeah, it's funny because it's so now everything we're walking around with virtual networks, between our watches and our phones, headphones, your cars, right? We've wired up sources cars. Back in the day, if there was anything transmitting from your car, that doesn't make sense. Now every car transmits. You have 50 different things happening, even when a car's off. So it became a lot easier. It gave the sources, I think, a lot more plausible deniability. If something were to come up, to be like, I don't know, it's a BMW. It's like does any of us here understand how a BMW works? That scene in Donnie Brasco where he's checking his car, rips the stereo out. It's like, do that on a late model German car now. You'd be there for 2 years pulling the guts out of that dashboard. But know what half of it was.
Yeah, it's all the Internet of Things, right? That's the convenience of what we all want now with technology. And you bring up a good point. All that stuff is all discoverable now. Yeah. We're figuring out a way on the legal side to tie all that data, because there is so much data out there. And how can I get that data, and how is it useful to whatever problem I'm trying to solve here? I'm seeing it left and right here with the wearables being discoverable now on personal injury cases. We want to see what your heart rate is, because we want to see if you're going to the gym. And you see, you're disabled, you can't work out, but then you've got this, these 2-hour blocks 5 times a week, where your heart rate is elevated.
You're doing CrossFit.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Sean T's yelling at somebody, right? It's terrible. But it's amazing how technology has really advanced, and good for you having the foresight of seeing where all that was going, and that really laid the groundwork, I think, for what you're doing now. So tell me a little bit about your company now, what you do, and what your specialty is.
Yeah, so I left the FBI in 2015, and I left with 3 other FBI agents from cyber, because we were working different aspects of cyber breach cases, and it became really obvious to us that we would go into these boardrooms to advise these companies. They'd call the FBI, there was a massive breach, And it became obvious to us that a lot of the companies that they were bringing in on the private sector side, maybe were very technically capable, but beyond that, weren't able to provide much guidance at all as to like what it means, right? So they're saying, we can show you this came in this date and that came over here and this data moved over here and it left on this date. And then like, so, okay, so what should we say to our board? What should we say to our regulators? What should we say to our customers? What's our next step? And they would really tap out, a lot of them at that point, or they would honestly be faking it. There's a lot of things that we saw that were people just giving horrible advice. Now at the FBI, we couldn't contradict that. That's not our role.
Right.
So we would get those phone calls. Hey, I really wasn't comfortable with what so-and-so was saying. Do you agree? And we'd say, you're putting me in a bad spot, right? You know, because I don't want what I'm telling you to do it, and then it doesn't go right, and you blame the FBI and say, hey, the FBI told me to. So it started to become obvious to me and the other is that there's a huge void here in private sector. So if we left to provide cyber defense service, cyber investigation related services, proactive services with the FBI background we have, I mean, who would be better positioned to do that than people who were doing it for the FBI? And I was going with people that help create the cyber program. I mean, I came in late into the cyber program at the FBI. I was leaving with people, the ASAC of cyber, and an agent from cyber that were there from the beginning when they were doing bootleg DVD cases. So they were there for the entire evolution of cyber. So when we left, we went over to a company called K2 Intelligence, which is a big investigations firm. Now it's K2 Integrity. Jules Kroll and Jeremy Kroll, awesome people. We met with them. They were looking to expand their services that they could provide because they were seeing the same thing, which is every single business intelligence investigation we're doing has a cyber nexus, right? It was all coming together. Everyone's realizing like, we're doing these great investigations, but if someone says this might have happened on the laptop, you need people there that know how to do real forensics on a laptop.
Sure.
So we left, we started doing that there. We set up, we were doing incident response and we were doing proactive services. And then it started to grow very, very quickly. And then we started to get into areas like managed security services that really opened up everyone's eyes to say, well, we can't really continue to grow this within a consulting firm, within the consulting firm model. If we're providing like true technology services, managed services, threat intelligence. So what if we spun off and started a new company? So Jules and Jeremy were all for it and said, all right, well, let's see what the interest is. And so we ended up coming across our CEO, Jim Rosenthal, who was over at Morgan Stanley for many years as the CLO. And he was looking to do what his dream was. And his dream was to become part of a startup for cyber defense, because he was seeing all the problems that Morgan Stanley was dealing with day to day, and they have unlimited budget.
Yeah, of course.
So he's sitting there going, if we're struggling with this, and it's a daily fight, how does like a small to medium-sized business deal with this constant onslaught? So we met him. He was super interested in doing it, loved what we already had going. So we broke off very quickly. Within 6 months, he raised a ton of money, dumped it into Bluevoyant. And so now we have three service business lines. We have our professional services, which is what my team falls under, the team I run. I'm head of cyber forensics incident response. So my whole team does nothing but breach response investigations. Okay. On the other side of professional services, we have proactive services, which are like the pen testing, gap assessments, architectural reviews, really all the things that we urge customers and clients to do. So you never have to meet me. Yeah. You never want to meet me. You never want to see my bald head on the other side of a conference call. So do all those proactive things so that any breaches you might have are minimal. They're contained, they're tiny. And then we have managed services, which is endpoint managed detection and response, where we actually push out sensors on your network. We have a SOC in Maryland that monitors 24/7. And that's probably the number one biggest thing you could do to prevent a breach. Yeah. It's basically endpoint, putting something on every endpoint in your organization so that if someone opens up the email with the ransomware, it may detonate on that machine, but it's going to stop there. We're going to see it immediately. We're going to quarantine that device. We're going to alert you. Then we're going to say, okay, this is what happened. It's contained at this point. And so go on your way, rebuild the machine and go on your way, as opposed to it, full-fledged compromising your network. Yep. Yeah. And then we have threat intelligence as well. So we bought some phenomenal data years ago while we were at K2, that some very, very high level DNS data that we can see essentially from the outside in, that when attacks are happening and when things are evolving on the internet, we can actually see that before it even hits specific companies. So the companies can actually use that data to see if they're being targeted before a breach even happens. So it was a dream. It was a dream for me. I always wanted to be a part of a startup as well. I was thinking, 10 years down the road, this opportunity might present itself. Going back to our earlier discussion about how things evolve, suddenly this startup thing comes almost out of nowhere, and we're thrust into the middle of it in 2017, and we started Bluevoyant. So it's been incredible. I mean, what a blessing.
So we were talking earlier, even before we started recording, about the challenges of leaving a government position and now coming in and in the private sector, having to deal with insurance companies and being on panels, and even you getting solicited to do work. One of your first questions is, who's your carrier? Making sure that you're going to get paid on this. So let's talk about that a little bit with your experience in dealing with that.
Yeah, and you brought this up earlier, and I think it's a great topic, because I get at least 5 or 10 phone calls a year from former colleagues, friends of former colleagues that are thinking about making that transition from the government to the private sector. And there are a lot of misconceptions. I think there are a lot of things that people rightfully so are nervous about. And the transition isn't always smooth, taking those skills you have from the government side, going to the private sector. I mean, I remember, when you're at the FBI, if we're dealing with a company that's in the midst of a breach, we're going to work at our pace. And I don't owe them anything, in that sense of, like, if they're like, hey, we need an update today, if we're not prepared to give an update, we can't. There might be reasons, because we might be ready to go do search warrants, and I can't give you an update that's going to ruin it. I can't even tell you about that.
Quick, everybody burn everything.
Yeah, right. So so the biggest difference is that when you move from government to private sector is there's a paradigm shift. There should be a paradigm shift in your mind that you have to be ultra responsive to the client. And you don't have the whole, hey, we're the FBI, we'll let you know when we let you know kind of thing. Yeah. Not that I did that a lot, but there was certainly that fallback. If I had somebody that was being really pushy and aggressive, I could push back and say, hey, listen, there are a lot of other things happening. I've told you everything I could tell you up to this point. I'll talk to you next week. You can call me every day if you want. It's not going to matter. Private sector, totally different. You have to switch your mindset to that you're servicing the client in that way. And you're going to get a lot of those phone calls.
Yeah. I mean, listen, that's what managed services is for. Let that team deal with it, right?
Yeah. That's the cool thing. Like, doing breaches, I look at it, and that's why the team that I have is so phenomenal. We love it because we get inserted into these crisis management scenarios, but it's only going to last for a month or 2 or 3. So if the client is really difficult to deal with, it's only, hey, get through it. We're not married to them. And that's kind of nice, as we get to do, we might have 20 active cases at any given moment, but even the bad ones that are tough clients, we know will be over soon. I love that part of it.
Yeah, no, it's a whole new animal. I mean, it's very interesting to see the transition and the folks that really are thinking about doing it and really are unsure. What would you say would be a mistake that folks that are leaving government make to get into the private sector? What would you say would be like the number one mistake they make?
The number one mistake, or the number one kind of pet peeve that I have, is people who overly rely on their experiences at the government level and seem to expect to carry it through the private sector. And the private sector is obviously much more cutthroat, right? And so there is nothing wrong with, of course, using your experience at the government. I always looked at it 2 ways, right? There's a lot of back and forth when you take a government job. You're not getting a tremendous amount in salary, but I'm also being paid in experience that you can't get anyplace else. And to me, that's an investment in your future. So I always understood that. I never thought I'd leave the bureau before 25 years. But I understood that even if I did, I was getting something back beyond payment. But once I left, of course, you're going to ride those credentials into your new gig, and you're going to be this former this and you're former that, and you did this case and you did that case.
Prestige to that, definitely.
Yeah, but I gave myself 6 months of time to float on that, knowing that I had to create new experiences in the private sector that were more directly relatable to what my clients needed.
Right.
And so I didn't want to mention the FBI thing beyond just a part of a general introduction of my background. You talk about Silk Road and things like that, great cases and all that, but no one's calling us because they're looking to take down a dark web market selling drugs. That's not the kind of work I do. So I think I cringe a little bit. And I think I tell people that I'm close with when they're looking at it is that if you're talking about that too much beyond 6 months, you're setting yourself up for a disaster down the road where someone might realize that, you haven't made that conversion. You haven't moved from the mindset of the government side to the private sector side. So my best cases now are the cases that we've done in the private sector for private sector clients. So if someone says to me, we have an IR matter, tell us about the work you do, I spend 1 minute on my FBI background and I spend 10 minutes on the cases that I've done that are relative to what they're asking me to do. So if it's a ransomware investigation, I'll say we've done a ransomware investigation, a breach investigation for a Bitcoin exchange, just like you. And this is what happened. This is how we dealt with the hot wallet services. And this is how we dealt with this. That to me, if I were on there, and it's more persuasive than saying, I jumped out of a helicopter once and I, shot a machine gun. Like, it's cool. Those are cool bar stories, but that's not you're going to find yourself looking for new jobs every 2 years if that's all you have.
Oh, that's a great point, man. So what would you say, like, let's say you're an investigator, right? You're a private investigator, you're running your own business, and you get a phone call from somebody that has had a cyber attack, and it's kind of not your specialty. Normally folks may turn that work away. It's one of the reasons that we do this show here is because we want to introduce people to folks like you. So when they get that phone call, they say, I got a guy, I know somebody, let me connect the dots here. So what would you say would be the threshold for an investigator? If you get that kind of call in where you're like, well, this is way above my pay grade. Now it's time to call Vinny. How would you walk somebody down that? What does that look like?
Yeah. So most of my friends that do the PI work, the majority of the work that they're going to get that fall into the types of stuff that forensics firms would do would be classified usually as private client, what I would consider private client services. So you're going to have a client who is going through a divorce or going through some dispute and has a device that they want to pull and extract information from. That technically is forensics. There's forensic work to be done. That's not what we really do at Bluevoyant, but there are companies that do that for that.
Yeah. And Amber Schroeder, she's great at doing that stuff.
Yeah. And it's totally fine. For me, the threshold is when my friends that do this work call me is, first question is, it typically should be related to a corporate breach or a business breach. It's not personal. It's not someone looking to find out their husband is cheating on them or their husband's doing whatever. It's that there's been a breach at the company, and maybe it's something as simple as a business email compromise where there's like a wire transfer redirect, right? Those are super common, right? Company gets duped, they wire out $1 million and they realize they wired it to the wrong company. And now each party's pissed off because they're saying, hey, I already paid. And they're saying we never got it. So somebody's got to figure out what happened. Then those types of things would rise to that level. Of course, ransomware being probably the number one thing we do now. And that's an obvious one, right? Hey, our network was hit where all of our devices are encrypted. I think from the PI's perspective, gathering some baseline information before you make the phone call is really helpful. So some of that baseline information would be determining whether this is personal or corporate related, determining the general gist of it. You don't have to be super technology driven, but if you know that it's a business email compromise, it's a ransomware case, it's an insider threat case. PIs get a ton of those. We have an employee that we think is stealing information from our company. Get the general gist of it before you reach out to someone like me, so that I can hopefully save us all time, because if it's something that's not in our wheelhouse, I don't want to waste everyone's time and get on phone calls. So I could say, hey, I can't do this. I'll give you the name of someone who does this kind of work. Or I could say, yes, let's set up a scoping call right away. We'll jump on a phone call. The insurance thing that you mentioned is really important. I wouldn't want to subject the person calling me to. Bottom line is ask if they have insurance. I would never want to torture. To say
that's the more important question. Who's paying the bill?
Do you have insurance? Who's your carrier?
Right.
And if they don't know, then you've now given them good advice, which is you need to find out. You need to find out the insurance because you need to call them first and let them know. And then you could always mention a Bluevoyant and say, hey, we spoke to Bluevoyant briefly. They advised us to call you. We'd like to work with them. And if we're on their panel and everything, then that'll happen. But these things are crisis scenarios, and I don't want to waste their time and take them down a road of doing something and then they go, we can't use you anyway. I'd rather them get to the right person faster.
Yeah, no, that's great. So we're going to segue just a little bit too, because I want to go back to before we wrap up here. I want to go back to the person that's just starting their own business and leaving the federal government and doing their own thing here. I think something that may get overlooked is continuing education. I think folks that really succeed in doing this kind of stuff don't just rely on their past experience. They're hungry to continue that knowledge, right? They're going to the osmosises, they're going to the different programs that are out there. And during COVID, forget about it. It's like everywhere. There's so many virtual learning opportunities for people. Most are actually even free. I think the folks that are going to succeed are the ones that are going to take it that extra step, right? To have the foresight to say, okay, I need to learn what are the trends and topics today? What are everybody talking about? And how can I get a piece of that, right? How can I get into that? So yeah, I think it's really, really important to stay on top of that stuff. Whatever it is you decide to do coming out of the government, continuing education, even if it's not required in your state, because like New York, it's not for PI licenses. Do it anyways, because it'll make you more marketable, right?
Yeah, it's part of what we were talking about before this. The networking is a big part of it. Identifying people within the industry that you respect, that are good sources for information, that they can look at you in the same way. You're talking about Kenny, right? Kenny is always hungry for discovering new ways to do things, right? If I had this, how would I get to that? If you're not doing that, things are evolving so quickly that it. If you talk to somebody who tapped out on learning new techniques, new methodologies 10 years ago, within 2 minutes, this guy, he doesn't even know what's possible anymore. And so you have to be thinking about that. Anything you do regarding investigations, whether you're at the federal government or even more so in the private sector, is evolving so quickly that it's part of your self-preservation. Like you said, even if it's not required, it should be part of your self-preservation to be useful, to have a job, to continue to go out there and discover new things, so that when it comes across in a new case, you don't miss an opportunity to knock something out of the park because you're completely unaware of a technology that may exist, a database that may exist, a technique that may exist, because you decided you just didn't care enough to learn about it.
Right. And then all of a sudden you actually become an expert in that as well. Right. And then there's, you're speaking about it, you're teaching about it.
Exactly.
And you could see your business, really, really take off with that. So yeah, man, these are all really good points. The thing I love about Ken is I'll get texts from him at like late 12:30. Hey, I just did this training, or just got this certificate, I'm like, all right, man, let's talk about it tomorrow. Late.
Same thing. And for you younger people, you have no excuse, right? Because you're talking about Kenny, Kenny grew up long before the internet, right? For people that are getting into this business that grew up with the internet, with cell phones, you have zero excuse, especially from a technology perspective, to not be on the ball with what's available to you. It's harder for people that are older, of course, because it's so different than the first half of their life, all of this stuff. So you have less of an excuse, I think, the younger you are, to really go out there and be aggressive with this. And for the older guys that are doing this, they bring that experience to the table, which is invaluable. You can't substitute that, but they're going to have to work harder at understanding the technology as it evolves.
Yeah. I mean, listen, your experience, your past experience will only get you so far, right? There comes a point where you actually have to, do your craft, right?
Yep.
If you want to be in the private industry, you got to actually do your craft. All right, we're going to wind down here, man. Vinny, thank you so much for this. This was really, really great. Just fascinating to meet you and understand where you're from and what you do. How do folks get a hold of you if they had any further questions?
I mean, Bluevoyant.com. You can reach me through the website if you have a breach or anything like that. You can go on my Twitter. It's at Proof of Work 1. I do post all sorts of things on there related to all the different things I'm interested in, from cyber to organized crime to Bitcoin to whatever what have you. But yeah, it's probably the best way.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back on at some point to talk about Bitcoin too. That's always it's show worthy. It's good stuff. So, all right, man. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we will catch everybody on the next show.
So that was a great show. Thank you, Vinny, for coming on and talking about your experiences. We look forward to having him back on to talk about Bitcoin and that side of the business. We'd also like to thank Crosstracks, Merlin Locate, IRB, and the PI Institute for Education for sponsoring our show. Have you checked out investigatorstoolbox.com yet? Remember, it only takes 49 cents a day to unlock the future of investigations. So make an investment in your business and yourself today. You can save some money by using code PIP201836 to save an extra $20. And if you have a question or a comment about the show, email Matt at matthews@satellitepi.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. We want your feedback to bring you the best shows possible. And we'll be back on Monday with a new show, so make sure you tune in. Stay safe out there.